Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
This is Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. You can follow us on Twitter. The Twitter handle is @stuff_talking. We also have a, what do they call those things? A YouTube page, and that's LD Rimmer. And then, of course, to find us, if you haven't found us already, it's www.talkingbooks.tk. This is Dennis Rimmer with us today from Vancouver. Apparently it's raining today. I'm not surprised. Kristi Charish. Kristi, how are things out there?
Well, the raining sums it up, but that's kind of par for the course out here, but they're going well. Thanks you so much for having me on, Dennis.
Oh, you're welcome. And what caught my eye was the publisher sent along Voodoo Shanghai. It's a KINCAID Strange novel. And, okay, Kristi, who is KINCAID Strange in 20 words or less?
KINCAID is a voodoo practitioner who lives in Seattle with the ghost of a deceased grunge rocker. And she spends her days dealing with the problems of ghosts and zombies and trying to solve the odd murder.
And I'm assuming the murders are quite odd, to use all sorts of meanings of that word.
Well, it's paranormal. It's paranormal urban fantasy. So, occasionally there's a bit of magic involved, or the underworld, in this case, the other side, the land of the dead. And, sometimes the murder victims aren't necessarily alive at the time. So it, throws a bit of a wrench in things for her and the legal community. So, yeah.
That's where we went. Okay, Kristi Charish is with us. She has a background in archaeology, a PhD in zoology from University of British Columbia, UBC. How does an archaeologist and a zoologist end up being a writer of paranormal urban fantasy fiction?
Well, interestingly, the archaeology, I only spent about a year of my undergrad in archaeology. I've sort of kept up with it, as a hobby over the years and such. But I lasted about a year at Simon Fraser before I took a class with Brute Galdicus that was supposed to be a very famous primatologist, and it was supposed to be archaeology. And what we ended up getting was we got a very cool sort of human evolution and primatology class. And that got me interested in genetics and, evolution and sort of these biological aspects. And so by the second year of my undergrad, I was out of archaeology and I was doing ecology and then genetics. And that was kind of how I ended up from point A to point B. And I've never really looked back. So, yeah, how does a geneticist, I guess, or a cell biologist geneticist end up writing? A lot of the things you're doing in an experiment, planning out you're in a lot of ways, you're guessing what's going to happen, or you're coming up with a hypothesis about what's going to happen, and then you perform the experiments in order to see if you're right, or if you're wrong. You then try and decide, well, how do I change course? And oddly, I find that plotting out a novel is a very similar process. My characters and what they do are kind of the hypothesis and the experiment, and whether or not it's believable is the result, and tells me with my first readers if I need to tweak something or change my novel hypothesis.
So you're the kind of writer who plots things out in advance? Not some of them just sit down and bang away until the story finishes, but you kind of know what's going to happen before it happens?
A bit of both. So the sort of the pantsers or the plotters, what I'll tend to do is I'll often sit down and start writing and just I'll come up with a character and I'll come up with an idea. In the case of Kincaid Strange, it was, what if we could really talk to ghosts? And we had, sort of these sentient zombies, not the Walking Dead kind, but the sort of the old voodoo style zombies who can talk and think. And one of the kind of, one of the things I'll do is I'll start writing, and I'll start, the first 3 chapters might just be me thinking about where I want the story to go. But I find by about the 3rd chapter, after I've done just sort of some free writing, the next thing I'll come up, or I'll start developing these points in the novel that I want to get to. So they're kind of, they're not really detailed outlines, but I'll often write the last chapter or the epilogue after I've done the first 3 chapters. So, and I'll have a few scenes that I really want to happen. And they're not really a roadmap, but they're more of a target of where I need to get to. And once I've got those in place, then I can kind of fill in the blanks.
Okay, so it is sort of planned out, but you're not exactly following the map from A to B to C directly. You could go kind of wandering around a bit to some small towns off to the side, or different attractions, and then kind of lead you back to your epilogue. But it doesn't necessarily start out at A and have to end at the epilogue the way one would think a roadmap would be.
Yeah, or the way I initially thought it might have happened. The way I was thinking, I've changed my mind partway through. And so that's kind of the way I tend to write. Something might change my mind of what I had originally. If I had an idea of, I'm going to get to the epilogue by following A, B, and C, well, that might, just like you suggested, that might change partway along the way as I'm writing and I'm, exploring and figuring out my characters.
Well, fiction writers tell me that, because that's something I can't do. I can't figure out how you guys do it, how you'll be writing and all of a sudden a thought comes out of nowhere and you almost stand up and yell, "Eureka! Where did that come from?" So how do these characters are just bouncing around in your brain, and then some of them are demanding to come out more than others are?
I don't know. I guess it's different for every writer. For myself, I've heard some authors will just, as you sort of pointed out, they won't be writing, and then all of a sudden the idea will come to them because they're thinking about it. For me, I need to be writing. So often if I'm on the bus or I'm driving in the car, I'll be thinking about the novel. And I'll be thinking about the characters and what I want them to do. And sometimes I'll have those moments, while I'm just sort of sitting there in the car out for a walk. But I would say the majority of the time, I might not know where I'm going, and I might not have, I might sort of have a bit of a roadblock, but provided I'm writing and I'm trying to work through it, eventually I get those moments.
And with us today is Kristi Charish from Vancouver, BC. Number of books are out. The Voodoo Killing, Lipstick Voodoo, and Voodoo Shanghai series. So, Kristi, let's go back to the beginning. Where does your story begin? Where did you start out in life?
Originally I'm from Ontario, oddly enough, like a lot of people from BC, and moved out here with my family while I was in high school. To the West Coast, and I've been here ever since. I was lucky enough to do some traveling in high school and university, places like Brazil and Australia, which heavily influenced my first series, Owl in the Japanese Circus, which is a bit of a globetrotting adventure one. And then when I got out of high school, I decided I wanted to go to university, and I ended up as I mentioned earlier, I went to Simon Fraser University and was initially there for archaeology and sort of meandered my way through ecology and got to do some cool summer research projects out in the San Juan Islands with the ecology department at Simon Fraser, and then ended up in research doing fruit flies, working on fruit flies in my undergrad, and just sort of kept going from there. I started doing research with fruit flies, and it was so much fun. It was a bit like a video game, but in a petri dish, and I loved the genetics aspect, so I just kept going with it. And the next thing I know, I had a PhD, and didn't want to continue with academics. The trick is once you finish a PhD and you do a postdoc, the sort of career progression is to run a research lab. So you're doing teaching and you're doing you're writing a lot of research papers, not necessarily doing experiments anymore, which was the part I really liked. So I sort of ended up thinking to myself, well, if I could get paid to do something that, was not if I could get paid to do something where it wasn't like I was actually doing a job, what would it be? And this was probably about 10 odd years ago. My answer was, well, I'd love to be a writer. I love reading. I love the idea of writing stories. And started writing while I was finishing up my PhD thesis. So I do about an hour. Initially, it started off as like an hour of writing fiction and an hour of doing my PhD thesis. And as I progressed, it morphed to 2-3 hours of fiction writing and then, an hour of my PhD thesis. So by the time I was ready to graduate university from UBC and defend my thesis, I actually had a novel to go with it.
So was that your first published work?
That ended up being my first published work. Yeah, that was Owl in the Japanese Circus.
So you have two series. You've got the Voodoo series and the Owl series. So the Owl series, is that over and done with, or is there more of those coming?
Well, publishing's tricky. So anytime you do a series, it's nice to say, and you'll see authors say that's the end of that particular series. There's sort of a bit of a business. That's never true. They're one of my favorite urban fantasy series, which is the Kim Harrison Hollow series, was supposed to be done a couple of years ago. And lo and behold, there's enough demand that a few years later, there's the next one in the series that's now being published. So, in publishing, it ends up being a numbers game. And so you're always kind of working, the publisher's always thinking, can they, is it going to be a good business move for them to do the next in the series? And those decisions change all the time. So at the moment, there aren't any more Owl books because numbers-wise, it doesn't make sense for the publisher. But those kinds of decisions change, they can change quite quickly. All you need is a Netflix series or another series that you write that has a really great sales track record, and people pick up your first books, and then the next thing you know, there's another book in the series. So it's sort of a long-winded answer, but I get that question a lot, and I hear other authors being asked that question of, is it the end of the series, or do you just want to have a finite number? And sometimes yes, but often the answer is a lot more complicated. It has to do with the world of publishing.
Exactly. So we've got 3 in the Voodoo series now. Somebody says here, it was supposed to be the final installment in the trilogy, but here's hoping Charish isn't ready to write her off, meaning KINCAID Strange, write her off just yet. So you're telling us, yes, there might be some and maybe there won't be some.
Pretty well. Pretty well. It's up in the air.
Okay.
Not at the moment. So not at the moment.
Not at the moment. So what are the 3 Voodoo books?
So the first one's The Voodoo Killing. The second one is Lipstick Voodoo. And the third one, which just came out, is Voodoo Shanghai.
Now, do you have to read them in order, or are they standalones?
They are standalone. We tried to, when I was working on them with my editor, it's always one of those things. You don't want to have too much recapping for people who are reading the series, but you also don't want to leave somebody who picks the book up new to be completely lost and put it back down. So I think it's more enjoyable if you start with the first one, sort of and get a bit of the backstory, but you can just pick it up and start, and then if you like it, maybe go back and read the other two. But the previous two are all in library, so I always recommend if people are interested, try the library first.
Oh, exactly. Libraries are great. We just got a check for $200 for people borrowing our books from the library. So it's always a nice little, what do you call it? Pension plan almost.
It's a great, the Canada Arts Plan is fantastic. And I'm always telling Canadian authors to sign up for it because, it's a great way to reimburse authors whose books are in the library. And it also means that, I think Canadian authors were much more likely to say, hey, go to your library and try my book, because there's a bit of that kickback we get, which is, I think it's wonderful.
Now, you're a Canadian author, Kristi Charish, the Voodoo Killing, Lipstick Voodoo, Voodoo Shanghai series we'll talk about now. But they're set in the U.S., in Seattle, Portland. Why is that?
So that was a decision I made back in 2014 when I started the novels, and I don't know if this is still true today. This might have changed, but at the time, it was really the largest market for English-speaking language books is the U.S. I think that's sort of most people realize that, and the problem becomes if you are writing books. And if you're writing a commercial fiction book, and you're sort of going for a larger commercial audience, well, it gets really tricky to sell books in the U.S., or at the time it was, if it becomes a harder sell. I wouldn't say it's tricky, but it's a harder sell if the books don't necessarily happen in the U.S. That was something that, and again, these things do change, but an American audience was more likely to pick up a book or a new book from an author if there was some kind of a toehold in the U.S. So I went with Seattle. That was one of the reasons. It was it was a business move. I don't know if I would have made the same decision today. I think Vancouver could have worked. But the other reason I went with Seattle, I do love, I sort of love the history of Seattle. Seattle and Portland, which is partly where the third book takes place, have some, they do have some fantastic frontier, late 1800s city history. And it's quite rich, and it's quite, you sort of hear about the Old West, and that was kind of the last frontier of the Old West, where you really had, you had a damnably creative bunch of people running all sorts, all sorts of, in every which way kind of scam going. And it makes for very interesting history, and I think it makes for great character and setting.
And there's like the underground, hidden underground of Seattle, and all the rum running and bootlegging stuff from the 30s, and that went on. So
absolutely, so one of the Voodoo Shanghai, the title of the book, the Shanghai element was actually inspired by Shanghaiing, which was something that used to happen in Portland. And the term came about because you had Portland was one of the last stops on on the North American coast before boats would be going to across Pacific to Southeast Asia to Shanghai, and it was a route that no sailor wanted to take because it took you a long time. There was a good chance you'd die, or you'd starve to death, or something horrible would happen, and you wouldn't get there for years. The route took a really long time. So you could be gone for 3 years. And so the boats couldn't get people to man the ship. So some industrious, some industrious people in Portland said, wait a minute, there's a market here I could be filling. And you would be, so imagine you're a logger and you come in and you come into Portland and you're coming in for the weekend, you're going to have some drinks and then you're going to go back to work, and you get to a bar and you sit down and you start having a drink. Maybe somebody buys you a drink and, you start feeling a bit dozy. And the next thing you know, the bar is kind of empty and a trap door opens up beneath you. And you wake up in a cage with other people, other fellows who have, had similar misfortune.
Right.
Your boots have been taken. Your boots are gone. You could see them across the little sort of dungeon-like area you're in. And there's glass on the floor, even if you manage to get out of the cages. And, basically you're sold onto these ships as crew. Or the other option is you wake up on the boat and, you can hop off and swim, or you're along for the ride. And the term was Shanghai. So there's so much fantastic inspiration. And that's just one of many stories, that you get from the history of, the underground cities in Portland and Seattle, and just the history of the area. So, yeah, it's kind of like, I'm surprised there aren't more books written about that time period and about that history.
Yeah, it was sort of like you have a couple of drinks and the next thing you know, you are on that proverbial slow boat to China. So there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there it is. More and more, I think I've talked to authors about this. The stigma of setting a story in Canada seems to be going away. Gail Bowen is very successful with her series. We had a guy in Saskatoon, Anthony Badalka, wrote a very successful Russell Quant series of a gay detective based in Saskatoon who traveled around the world. So I know what you're saying. I think it used to be that way, but I think it's changing a bit. Sorry, what?
Yeah, there's another one. Another one is Avalee, the Ian Hamilton series about a forensic accountant from Toronto who travels around the world trying to find money that's gone missing. And I think as well. I think maybe the market's open. I think self-publishing and just the way things have gone digitally has maybe opened up that market, because, back when I first started writing, which wasn't that long ago, the major buyers for books were American publishers. That's maybe the other piece of information I should have thrown in there, is that you weren't selling novels to a Canadian publisher or necessarily, a UK or an Australian publisher. It was the US publishers. So if the editor you're submitting to doesn't know anything about Canada or doesn't have any interest, then, it's, but I think you're right. I think that has been fading to the, that stigma is fading away, which is great.
If there was a movie or a movie series, who would you like to play KINCAID Strange?
Who can they get? I guess that's more the question. It's such a hard question to answer, and I actually try not to now. And the reason is that when somebody reads a book, they picture their own character in the novel. Like nobody reads the same book. Everybody reads the same book differently. So I almost prefer that when people come into the novels, they come up with their own voice and their own caricatures for Kincaid and Owl. So yeah, I try and shy away from that. And plus, I'd almost rather, if it ever gets to that point, I think I'll just be happy with whoever they've got, signed on to do it.
Yes, and you're right, because even now, if I read an old James Bond movie, it's Sean Connery I see, or
yeah.
Yep. Basil Rathbone's still in the Sherlock Holmes ones. But other than that, it's kind of hard to... I don't know who I would want to play Jack Reacher in the Lee Child series of Jack Reacher books. So my wife and I talk about this all the time. We come up with a whole bunch of different cast lists. What gets you excited these days when you get up in the morning and you say, wow, I get to do this today? What gets you going?
What gets me going? Well, getting my daughter to preschool has been a huge has been fantastic for me this past. So we just started preschool, and you and your listeners can probably hear that I have a bit of a cold, and she loves it. We love it because I'm back to my writing schedule, which is awesome. But she started a couple of weeks back, almost a month ago, and we were really. Well, at least I was really concerned. I was like, oh my gosh, there's going to be so many more colds and germs. She's going to be sick so much her first month. Oh no, it wasn't her we had to worry about. It was us we needed to worry about. I think I've had 2 colds this month so far, from the patient zero coming in and introducing me to all these wonderful childhood viruses. So, but right. That's been wonderful. Because it's giving me a bit more time to sit down and write and work on projects that I've got on the go, and just sort of plot things out and think. The other thing is I have an interesting part-time job that I do along with my writing, and that's that I work in the Vancouver film industry. So I work as a background performer on movie and television sets, and I do that usually a few days a week. So that's always interesting. When I have a day that I'm going to be going to a movie set, I pack my laptop up with me because it's a lot of time sitting down and doing nothing.
I've done that before too. You sit around waiting, and then it's first positions, and off you go. Yeah. So I do that, and part of the reason I started it is I was going to coffee shops, and I was taking my laptop with me, and of course I had to buy the cup of coffee and the the donut or croissant. And when I go to movie sets, not only am I getting paid to write for quite a bit of the time, but the coffee and the donuts and lunch are all are all included. Yes.
So that's part of the deal. So arguably, I'm the Vancouver film industry is actually paying me to write my next novel, which is I think is kind of fun.
It's great,
and it also gets me a bit, it also gets me a bit of social activity for the day too. So because writing can be quite isolating, like you're sitting there and you're writing on a laptop, and sometimes that's wonderful. And other times you're sitting there and you're like, well, I'd love to talk to somebody. And that's one of the great things I get to do on set too, is I get to sit down and chat with other people. A lot of writers. I was kind of surprised how many writers and artists do background in the Vancouver film industry. So yeah. I'm not the first person to have come up with this.
Well, I worked in radio in Vancouver, and one of the guys I worked with, he was doing that as an extra, and they found out he had a union card. So the next thing you knew, he's a stand-in, getting stand-in money and getting steady work. And so he liked that. Where do you like to go in Vancouver? Where's your favorite place to have a meal?
Have a meal? Oh my goodness. I really like. Well, obviously, the first answer that comes to mind is the catering on film sets is really second to none.
The craft service is excellent.
The food really is fantastic. Like, I mean, I don't know many jobs where you show up and you get roast beef or prime rib or it's quite wonderful. But a couple of the spots I really do love in Vancouver is actually one of my favorites is I really enjoy Rodney's Oyster Bar downtown. That's a lot of fun. And my second place, if people were in Vancouver and they were thinking of a spot to go, and if I could recommend just one spot to get out of downtown Vancouver or to visit if you're from out of town, it would be the beer stretch in Port Moody. So if you get off, it's kind of like beer. I think they call it Beer Alley, but Port Moody, for whatever reason, it's on the sky. It's right outside the SkyTrain station, and they've got about 5 or 6 breweries now. They're all in a row across the road from one of the parks.
Okay. Yep.
And They are some of the best. They do some of the nicest beers, I think, in Vancouver. Yellow Dog, Twin Sails. Twin Sails is one of my favorites. The Bakery, Parkside, and Moody Ale. And you can sort of do the stretch quite quickly. You could, they're all very easily walking distance or crawling distance, depending on, what your flavor is. And so to go with the breweries, there are also food trucks that park outside. And usually there's usually at least one food truck parked outside each of the breweries. So you could go have something to eat, sample some of the beers, and then wander to the next one. So that's actually one of my favorite spots to go.
Perfect. And we've been talking about all sorts of subjects. Forgot to go back and talk about books. Kristi Charish with us today here on Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. The Voodoo series. What are the 3 books again?
The Voodoo Killing, Lipstick Voodoo, and Voodoo Shanghai.
And Voodoo Shanghai just came out. And like Kristi said, if you are just wondering about her works, maybe don't want to buy one, go to your local library. Ask for something by Kristi Charish. It's Charish. And then you can get into it from there. Would that be a good piece of advice for people? Yeah.
I think going to the library more is always a great piece of advice.
And you have a website, I assume.
I do, KristiCharish.com, just my name. And then, of course, I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, which I think is a prerequisite now. But, yeah.
Yeah. Kristi is Kristi, Charish, CHARISH.com. I can't read my own writing here. And one more question before we go. What's the hardest lesson you had to learn as a published author?
There is no such thing, regardless of what the media tells you and what the clickbait headlines tell you. There is no such thing as an overnight success. It's overnight success. Almost every author I've spoken to who's sort of been touted as a breakout author with their breakout New York Times bestselling book, it's like when you actually speak to them and to meet them at a conference, it's their 10th book or their 5th or their 6th or their 15th book, and I think that was something that I didn't. It was a great piece of a great bit of I don't know if it's advice or something that I found out about the publishing world, and I think for any writers out there, it's a great thing to learn and be aware of. If the first book doesn't get picked up or published, or isn't an international bestseller, just keep going.
And Kristi Charish has been with us today. The book we discussed in Maine was The Voodoo Killings. There's also, if I can find my notes here, we have Voodoo Killings and Lipstick Voodoo. So it's Voodoo Shanghai and Voodoo Killings and Lipstick Voodoo. And Kristi, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Dennis.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.